Welcome to My Nerd World. I'm your host, Jon Justice, on this Memorial Day weekend episode. I hope you have and are having a fantastic holiday. On the show this week, lots to cover. Vanity Fair released their customary cover for the Rise of Skywalker. I collect all those issues and magazines. Just fantastic photographs from Ann Leibovitz. I'll give you my thoughts on it. Lots of details in the lengthy articles that were released from Vanity Fair. We'll dive into all that. We have some audio to share with you from some videos that were released from the Vanity Fair photo shoot as well. I went out shopping, and I picked up something really, really cool, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. It's Last Jedi related. Also, we will get into this. Somebody posted this on Twitter, and I went and did some looking into it, and to me, it really, really fit, especially as we're getting more details about the Rise of Skywalker, and specifically information and the deeper bond between Ben Solo and Rey. But this invisible red thread that connects those who are meant to be together. We're going to talk a bit about that. Plus, we'll get into listener feedback as we normally do. So let's go ahead and kick things off for this Memorial Day weekend, My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast.
The third of this trilogy, the ninth in these 9 films, to have Annie Leibovitz come and document the work that's being done is incredible. And it's a gift.
Here we go.
Annie has been a part of this saga for almost 40 years. She's sharing in the culmination of this with all of us. It's an incredible honor to have her step in and capture this moment.
It feels like a proper journey. We were in the desert for the first one, and now we're here for the last one. I feel very nostalgic at many, many points that this is sort of... As everyone says, you don't get experiences like this very often.
It has been this incredible journey.
I'm going to miss it so much.
Me, Daisy, and Oscar. It's like a moment in all of our lives, really. This is truly it. It's a blessing and an honor.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
I want to start off by mentioning one rumor that dropped this week. I don't have a ton to get into about it, and I might talk about it a little bit more at length later on in the show. It is sort of slated in my notes and falls into the category of why Star Wars needs to always take risks. But there was a BuzzFeed News story that came out a couple days ago saying that a Knights of the Old Republic script had been penned by this female screenplay writer. And I didn't spend a ton of time on the article. It looks like, and the way that people were sort of, if the information is legitimate, a lot of people were relating this to the Benioff and Weiss getting the first movie and whether or not this next series of films would be based on the Knights of the Old Republic, and how if this particular screenplay was being written by this individual, then perhaps it was the first indication that this would be the script attached to Benioff and Weiss. And I got further confirmation on that. I guess they will not be directing. They'll play more the role of producer. It's kind of odd. But a lot of people weren't putting a ton of credibility on it based off of the source. And I'm hesitant right now to really talk at length about those upcoming films that were announced in the Disney slate of films, only because I read, was it on Twitter? I read something else this week in the middle of all this Vanity Fair coverage about how that schedule that was released is very fluid, that they're not showing their hand completely, and that things can change. Oh, and by the way, another side note, I just remembered this. I didn't have it down on my notes, but I remember last night. Rian Johnson tweeted last night, and it was a photograph of his wristband to Galaxy's Edge, and he put out a tweet about how he got a special tour of Galaxy's Edge and how amazing it was. This is completely anecdotal. However, if Rian Johnson is getting private tours via Disney of Galaxy's Edge and then posting about it, I guess to me, I look at that and I go, yeah, he's still working with Star Wars, clearly. Like, if he was no longer, let's just say for the sake of argument, that Rian Johnson was no longer a part of Disney and Lucasfilm, the story group, and because those films are going to be so far out and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that as a person, Rian Johnson would be out there sort of stoking the fire by posting his wristband to Galaxy's Edge and talking about how amazing it was if he was no longer working on it. Does that make sense? That's anecdotal. Again, I just saying that to me, I took that as an indication that, yeah, he is still definitely working on Star Wars. So we do have a lot to get to with the Vanity Fair photos and coverage of the Rise of Skywalker. I have some audio to share. It's a 7-minute piece of audio by the writer of the articles for Vanity Fair, and it really lays out the new stuff that we learn. I have that in written form, and we'll work through it as well, but I definitely want to play you this audio because I think contextually it's better to hear this writer in his own words describe what it is that he thinks he knows, what he was told, and what was revealed to him. I won't necessarily be going shot by shot by shot in the Vanity Fair photos because these are staged photos and aren't actually taken from the movie. There is one that I do want to talk about, and it's the photo of Kylo Ren and Rey standing on top of what everybody believes, and I do too, is the remnants of the Death Star 2 with all this water going on, right? And this is obviously from the trailer as well. That is also a staged photo, but what I find interesting is it could be staged, but also the photos that Annie Leibovitz took was on location. And that was done in a studio. So there's some people that have been speculating that's actually a shot from the film. I'm sure that I'm sure she could have also gone to other locations. But that particular shot we will talk about a little bit later on when we get into more of the Vanity Fair coverage. I do want to start here, though, and sort of set the stage for this larger conversation about the Rise of Skywalker and what it means specifically for the main characters of Ben Solo and Rey. And I want to start by going and telling us a story of what happened yesterday to me. And I really love when things like this that I'm about to talk about happen. And it seems really minor and it happens all the time to people, but I don't know. I guess just as of late, I've really been noticing when these things happen and become more and more appreciative of when they do. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. We have free will, but as things play out, the things that happen in our lives, good and bad, they're happening for a purpose, even if we don't understand what that purpose is. And it's one of the central themes that I put in my first book, Embark, mynerdworld.net. You can get all the information about that. And it's one of the themes that will be running through the entire trilogy of that book. I wanted something, because of my love of Star Wars and writing the science fiction adventure, Earth-based in the future, but writing the science fiction adventure, wanting to sort of experience what George Lucas did in crafting this universe and characters and all that. You can't do, I don't want to do anything too fantasy, because that's been done a lot. But I wanted something in there. I wanted something to sort of ground the story. And I went with this idea of really embracing this for a reason, that everything happens for a reason. So yesterday, I've been wanting to go to a comic book shop for a while. And there's a really great comic book shop here in Minnesota, in New Hope, which isn't too far from where I live. I've only been there once, a couple of years ago, after we first arrived here in Minnesota. But I've been wanting to get my hands on the now Legends Dark Empire series, because I know a lot of people have referenced that as a place where they could be drawing ideas and lifting ideas for the Rise of Skywalker, especially with the apparent return of Palpatine in some way, shape, or form. But I haven't been able to track it down, and this is one of those moments where I'm not so bent on getting it that I'm disappointed if I don't. I could easily go to Amazon.com and pick it up there, but it's more fun to kind of go searching out in the wild for it. So we went to this comic book shop yesterday and didn't find the Dark Empire series, but what I did find, in my opinion, is even better. And this falls into that category of, man, I'm really glad that I went because I had no intention of getting these particular items, but now I'm really glad that I did. So the one item that I got, that I'll spend less time talking about, is the Star Wars Adventures: The Tales from Vader's Castle from IDW Publishing. I got the smaller collection of the 5 stories that were written in this series. I love Vader's Castle on Mustafar in Rogue One. It's my favorite moment in Rogue One. I love this idea of this is where Anakin as Darth Vader lives and spends his time in this castle. It's just so dark and foreboding and reminds me of that early Christopher McQuarrie artwork that we saw. Even before, this was during the original trilogy, where he had made sort of a lava chamber for Palpatine, and there was a castle involved, and I love the depiction of Vader's castle on Mustafar. So, and what these are, these Tales from Vader's Castle, they're just a series of 5 different sort of little kid-friendly horror stories, sort of like haunted houses. Really, really fun. And I read a few of them, but I prefer to have physical copies than the digital copies, and so I came across this. But the gem that I got my hands on, which I'd forgotten that I really wanted to get my hands on, and I don't collect a ton of comic books. I have, oddly, I have a decent collection. Most of them were gifted to me. I have all the original and signed Phantom Menace, the movie adaptation for the Phantom Menace. I got it in a nice little case. I got a bunch of really, really old comic books from the original run, back when the original trilogy was out in theaters, and then I have a sort of a smattering of stuff throughout the years during the prequel trilogy. That one, oh gosh, what was it again? I'm totally blanking right now. Shadows of the Empire. I have the full graphic novel version of Shadows of the Empire, which, if you've never looked at the history of Shadows of the Empire, take a few moments, look it up online, read the Wikipedia on it, or maybe it's just Wikipedia. Anyway, but go do a little research. I wish that somebody would do a documentary about Shadows of the Empire, because for those that don't know, the concept behind Shadows of the Empire was to do everything but the movie. So there was a book, there was a comic book adaptation, they did toys, there was a soundtrack, but they didn't do the movie. And honestly, that was something that I would still like to do with my science fiction series. If it ended up yielding enough financial opportunity when the second book comes out here in a couple of months, and then I'm currently in the middle of writing the third, and I hope to get that released shortly after book 2, so there's not quite as long of a gap between book 1 and book 2. But that was always an idea that I really liked. I'm like, man, I would really love to go and do sort of a Shadows of the Empire and even get some music, some original music to go along with it, and have somebody adapt a comic book and already have some toys. Tom Edwards, who does the cover art, was kind enough to give me the CGI files so I could 3D print, because we have a 3D printer here at home, some of the toys. But if you get a chance to go and read what the concept was with Shadows of the Empire, go and check it out. So we're at this comic book store yesterday, and I came across the Widow Walsh and Spicer Star Wars The Last Jedi comic book adaptation. Now, there's actually 2 versions of this, because I found the other version while we were there, too. There's more of a, it's not really anime, but it's in the style of artwork that was done for the Tales of Vader Castle, a little bit more cartoony than your average comic book, like more like if you saw like a 2D, more like the recent Star Wars Galaxy of Adventures, or the other series, the other 2D animated series that they had put out recently. The Forces of Destiny. I almost got it too, but I didn't want to spend too much money. But anyway, I picked up the comic book adaptation of The Last Jedi, and it is fantastic. It is so good. If you haven't seen this yet, again, and if you're a fan of The Last Jedi, okay, if you're not, that's cool. But if you're a fan of The Last Jedi, like I am, this is really, really worth getting. The opening pages, it actually starts off a little bit different, and it gives us a couple of panels of Luke, actually 2 pages of Luke on Ahch-To before the official opening of the film, talking about what's happened to him and why he's closed himself off to the Force. The artwork is just fantastic, and especially towards the end. And this is what I wanted to talk about while we get into the heart of the show. Was towards the end. Of course, you get the Luke and Kylo Ren face off. Okay. And then you get the final passing of Luke in 5 different panels. Just amazing artwork. And so it ends as it began, by the light of 2 suns before stepping into a larger world. And I just point that out because I know a lot of people have been talking about the Vanity Fair photos, and there's one particular photo of Luke with R2, and he's not done as a Force ghost, and some people are speculating that actually was an older photo because a lot of the pieces of a lot of the positioning of the way that Mark Hamill is standing and what he's wearing is really, really close to what it looked like for the Vanity Fair shoot for The Last Jedi. So there's a lot of people wondering if they even got a photo of him and they just included that from an older picture they used for The Last Jedi. But there's a lot of people still speculating the Rise of Skywalker and will Skywalker come back? Did he really die and all this? And the comic book adaptation, pretty much lays it out. And it's interesting, too, because there are liberties taken throughout the book, but there's specific places where liberties aren't taken. And the places where the liberties are not taken, and the stuff that really does match up almost directly with The Last Jedi, is all the stuff around Rey and Ben Solo. But the other thing I wanted to mention in this comic book adaptation of The Last Jedi that I thought was really, really cool was when you get to the last few pages and the end of the story, and this would be right after Luke's passing, when we get the final Force bond, which we'll talk about again in listener feedback, because I had asked the question last week about whether or not it was Snoke all along who had Force bonded Ben and Rey, and whether or not it just they stayed Force bonded, or if he was not the one who was Force bonding them, but he was just saying that he was. And I've got a lot of great comments from you guys about that. But the final Force bond in The Last Jedi, the way they depict it in the comic book is really cool, because you see the frame of Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, picking up his father's dice, and then you have a panel of him looking up like we see. But instead of seeing Rey standing in the entryway to the Millennium Falcon, they actually depict her standing in front of him in the room that he's in. And then when you see the next panel, you see Ben Solo / Kylo Ren from Rey's perspective, and he is out at her location. I just thought that was really cool. So instead of in the movie when we get the Force bond, we see them talking about how, can you see my surroundings? I only see you. And we get that from both perspectives, and the only time we actually see them sharing the same space is during the finger touch and loving scene. I just really appreciated how they depicted it here, where they actually gave you the good point of view of Ben Solo occupying, at least visually, the physical space in front of Rey, and Rey, from Ben's point of view, occupying the physical space. I just thought that was really, really cool in what they did in this Last Jedi, again, Widow Walsh and Spicer adaptation. So if you get a chance, and if you're, again, fan of The Last Jedi like I am, go and pick it up. It's absolutely, absolutely worth it. And it's interesting, too, because picking up this comic book, I don't want to say reinforced, but it really did remind me how much I do love this movie, and why right now The Last Jedi is my favorite Star Wars film. I'm reaching that level of fandom with that movie where now I kind of want to start getting my hands on as much Last Jedi stuff as I can. And look, I haven't had that type of feeling towards a Star Wars movie since I was a kid, right? I've loved all these films, and certainly when the prequels came out, there was a level as an adult, as opposed to when the original trilogy came out, where I did want to collect a lot more. And most of the stuff that I have from the prequel trilogy is all sort of centered around Attack of the Clones, just because that's at a time in my life where I had the money that I could go and spend to buy more toys. When Revenge of the Sith came out, we weren't doing quite as well financially, and so I didn't have the opportunity to purchase as much. And since then, I've been a little cautious in what stuff I purchase, just because we get so much content coming out now that it's hard to keep up, especially if you collect toys. So I certainly have a lot more Force Awakens stuff than I do Last Jedi stuff, but they also made fewer Last Jedi stuff. But just seeing this cover art, and it's the with the Praetorian Guards all bathed in red with Rey and Ben back to back getting ready to fight him again, it just sort of reinforced how much I just am such a huge fan of this film. And based off of what J.J. Abrams said with regard to how he approached the making of The Rise of Skywalker, there's some pretty relevant comments and quotes from JJ that we will dive into as we get into our conversation about this Vanity Fair expose, if you will, these articles that were written. So one more thing before we dive into that, and I was going to do this after we talked about the Vanity Fair stuff, but I really want to set the stage, because a bulk of my commentary on the show this week is going to be centered around the connection between Ben Solo and Rey. And what I'm really talking about is Reylo. The bulk of the conversation today is going to be around Reylo. And I'm in a very Reylo headspace right now, especially in the wake of the release of these photos and what they did and what they were depicting, right? This is Vanity Fair, and this is Annie Leibovitz, but I believe, in my opinion, there's a lot of direction going on from Disney as well, and Lucasfilm, and Kathleen Kennedy, and J.J. Abrams to portray the information in a particular way to get us prepared for what is coming next. They did that with The Last Jedi. You go back and look at the marketing for The Last Jedi and the conversations before The Last Jedi. And the same thing can be said for The Force Awakens, and I've talked about this before. But, the devil is in... Nah, that's not the right term. I want to say devil's in the details. They do take our hand as fans and lead us down a path to prepare us for what is coming next. And The Last Jedi full trailer absolutely did that. So let me cover this one thing, and then we'll dive into the Vanity Fair information. But because I absolutely love this. So somebody pointed this out on Twitter and talking about The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker and where Reylo would be heading. And I'd never heard of this before. But this invisible red thread, the red thread of fate. Okay, an invisible thread connects those who are destined to meet regardless of time, place, and circumstance. The thread may stretch or tangle, but it will never break. And this is according to an ancient Chinese proverb. And what I love about this is, at least for me, and again, if we're looking at this when it comes to interpretation, it does sort of fall under that category of happening for a reason. This red thread of fate of these two individuals that are tied, and this thread will stretch and it will bend and it will get twisted. But the reality is, if they are, I will add to this, it's not in this, but it's never going to break because it's fated to be this way, or in my opinion, to look at it another way, again, the idea that it's happening for a reason. The red thread of destiny is a belief, and this is, I pulled an article up on this particular idea. The red thread of destiny is a belief that comes from an ancient Chinese lore. It is also known as the red thread of fate or the red string of fate. It means that people who are destined to meet are tied together with an invisible red thread. Legend has it that the two people connected by this thread will have a major story regardless of the time, place, or circumstances. The red string might get tangled, contracted, or stretched, as surely often happens, but it will never break. According to the Chinese myth, the gods tied an invisible red thread around the ankles of a man and a woman who were destined to meet and get married, the myth of an Asian counterpart of the Western concept of soulmates or twin flames. The deity in charge of the red thread is believed to be Yu Ji Lao, a lunar matchmaker god who was also in charge of marriages. Okay. Knowing that we have been created in a pair, we go around our lives searching for the one who is our destiny. And every time we fall in love, we feel this is it, this is the one, and that we have found the other half. This person is our soul connection, and we gamble our hearts to find him or her. Many times our hearts, we break our hearts in our search for the right one, but when we find them, it is all worth it. However, it is also true that sometimes the path that leads to our destiny is a rocky road. It challenges everything that we have ever believed in about love and happily ever after. Even when we find the one of us, the one for us, things may not go smoothly. And I like that too, because this idea of the red thread of fate doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing. Okay, just in terms of the lore, right? And I'm just speaking fantasy terms of the lore of what we're talking about and how that may or may not relate to what we're seeing with Ben and Rey and Reylo. But the idea that even if they're tied together, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come out as a positive or that it's even going to be a good thing in the middle of that connection. It just means that this is what's destined to be. And I can't help but wonder if the place that we're going and how we're going to see this story resolved, because one of the things the Vanity Fair article points out is that we're going to see a definitive end to the Jedi Sith lore. This is, and the cover for Vanity Fair is very yin and yang. Okay, the light and the dark. We had that pin that we talked about a couple episodes, that piece of art that looked more like an emblem for a shield that showed these decorative marks surrounding the silhouettes of obviously Rey and Kylo with the helmet on, facing off against one another with water behind. And what I think is happening here is this balance. The way that we're going to reconcile this is that Ben and Rey, with a deeper connection than we even know, which they also talk about in Vanity Fair, they're going to be the ones to bring an end to the conflict because of what it is that they discover. And how I think this fundamentally could change what we've known so far is that perhaps the events that we've seen in the previous 8 films leading into 9 will be looked at through a different lens, because we'll actually find out that the Force has been trying to work this balance out for a long, long time, and it simply hasn't been able to do it. Like, here's just a from-the-hip theory before we get back into the red thread of fate. But let's just say, and again, I'm just shooting from the hip on this, it just popped into my mind. Maybe we need that reconcile of light and dark to end the conflict forever. So at the end of Return of the Jedi, where we had actually, let's go back to the Revenge of the Sith. We had the possibility of this happening with the rise of the dark and the light, but there wasn't a good enough, strong enough light to counter the darkness that was coming. You had Obi-Wan Kenobi, but he wasn't necessarily the light that rose up to counter the darkness that had been building. So ultimately, we saw the fall of the Republic under the Empire coincide with the rising of Anakin Skywalker without a good light to balance it. Then we get further down the line, and now we've got Luke. Now Luke goes on his hero's journey, and perhaps this will be it, bringing his father back. And at the end of Return of the Jedi, we have Luke who's teetering on the dark side, who's struggling with the light and the dark of the end of the film in his fight against both Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine, and his father. And at the end, we almost achieve it again with Luke throwing down his weapon. I am a Jedi like my father before me. The father deciding to try to end evil, bringing himself back from the darkness. You almost have a sense of balance, but what happens? We end up losing Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader in the process. And so now, once again, without having those entities, and again, I am just shooting from the hip here, throwing this out there. Without those entities, we do have, for the moment, a peaceful time with the Emperor seemingly destroyed, and unfortunately, Anakin Skywalker no longer with us, but having been redeemed. But now you just have a strong light. Okay? And now the darkness can go and rise again to counter the light of Luke Skywalker, and then we see that happening. And now we're heading towards the end once again, but this time the dark and the light are both present at the same time. And they need to go and resolve the conflict between the two of them, and probably against the ultimate evil that's still there, which is the whole reason why they were brought to the forefront to begin with. The Force brought both Kylo Ren and Rey alongside. Darkness rises in the light to meet it because there was an even larger evil out there that they need to end, to come together to bring balance ultimately. And it does, and if they were to do that, and again, I'm just shooting from the hip, if they were to go and do that, it does set the stage later on for the balance to get thrown off again, right? If another darkness begins to rise, and the Force will go and respond to it by bringing in another light, another Force user who would be representative of the light when it comes to the prophecy. Okay, and again, I'm just shooting from the hip. Let's get back to the red thread of fate here. Let's see. Let's see. However, it is also true that sometimes the path can be a rocky road. The time may not be right. The circumstances might challenge the strength of our bond. What remains is that people who are destined to be together will find a way back, because no matter what, we believe true love does exist, and it is eternal. All cultures have pondered what it is that governs the individual path of each person, and among them, many of them have conceived an astronomical thread that predicts their path. Okay, I just really like this idea that even if they're not playing off of this, it's a good example of what they could be doing, and this idea that these two individuals in Rey and Kylo Ren, not through lineage or blood, but through the Force, are connected in a deeper way than we've even realized, and they say as much again in this Vanity Fair piece. Black-Eyed Lily wrote a fantastic article it's a long email. Wrote me a fantastic email that we'll talk about when we get to listener feedback, that addresses this very point and how this actually started back in the Force Awakens. So we'll dive into that and then talk a little bit further about this idea of the connection between these two throughout the show this week, but also definitely in the listener feedback portion of the show.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, I want to dive into the Vanity Fair stuff. The photos were really cool, right? And we'll break some of this down with some of the details that we've been given based off those photos. The names of the planets. We got the full name, Zori Bliss, of Kerry Russell's character. The photo of her in that outfit, which so many people have mentioned, and they're absolutely right to do so, is very reminiscent of Zam Wessel from Attack of the Clones, especially having just watched that. What I love about that photo, really quick, of Kerry Russell in her Zori Bliss outfit, is the fact that the angle at which that photo is taken is not like the standard most flattering. Like most of the time when you see character photos, you see them sort of dead on in a stance, right? Especially within Star Wars. The way that Annie Leibovitz shot this, it's a profile shot. And it looks amazing even in profile. I mean, Kerry Russell is in just stellar. Her physique is stellar. She obviously takes really, really good care of herself. But normally that's not the most flattering angle to go and take. And yet here's this profile shot of this new character on this new planet in the background, which you can see a little bit of the details in the snow on the ground, and we'll talk a bit about the name. We see this as one of the first shots, apart from the force flip over Kylo Ren's TIE interceptor. But I just really liked the way that was photographed, and the fact that it's shot in profile really does, to me, lend to the strength of the artwork, of the costume design for that particular character. We did get a lot of details from the Vanity Fair article, and like I said, I do have a list that I'm pulling from, but I thought what I'd do is share with you the audio from the individual who actually wrote the article in Vanity Fair, because in it he basically lays out all of the things that they've learned. So here, I hope you enjoy.
My Nerd World.
Hi, my name is Lev Grossman, and I wrote a story this month for Vanity Fair about Star Wars with amazing photos by Annie Leibovitz. And this is what I know about Star Wars, this is what I don't know, and there's a bunch of stuff I can't tell you. To write this article, I spent time with J.J. Abrams at Bad Robot. I also went to Star Wars Celebration in Chicago, where I spent hours of one-on-one time with most of the cast members and also most of the major figures behind the scenes. Here's what we now know about the new movie. We're going to learn more about the origin of the First Order, which is something that The Force Awakens kind of skipped over. We are going to go back in this movie and explore how we kind of got into this whole mess. Maybe the most important relationship in the new trilogy is between Kylo Ren and Rey. They are on opposite sides, but there's a personal connection between them, and it's going to run deeper than we even thought it could. One thing fans have been waiting for a long time is the appearance of the Knights of Ren. The Knights of Ren were kind of a throwaway line in Force Awakens.
He means nothing to me.
Even you, Master of the Knights of Ren.
They're finally going to arrive in Skywalker. I spoke to Anthony Daniels, who plays C-3PO, and he says that C-3PO is going to do something in this movie that will surprise us all. C-3PO has a line that includes the phrase, common emblem. Anthony Daniels mentioned this because he had a lot of trouble saying it on set. We don't know what that means, but we do know C-3PO is going to say it. Although, as I pointed out in the article, they'll almost certainly change it once we mention it. Carrie Fisher, who plays Princess Leia, of course, tragically passed away before the filming of Skywalker, but she's going to be in the movie. They found scenes that they didn't use of her from Force Awakens and put those scenes in the new movie. So not only is she going to be in the new movie, but she'll actually have scenes with her daughter, who plays a Resistance lieutenant. There are a few new characters in the movie. We know one of them is named Zori Bliss. She is played by Kerry Russell. And we see her in the Thieves' Quarter of a planet called Kijimi. May not be an ice planet, but there's definitely snow. There's also a planet called Pasaana. We know that it is on the edge of the galaxy, and its inhabitants are called the Aki-Aki. The footage of Pasaana was shot in Jordan in a place called Wadi Rum, which is extremely remote and is where they shot Lawrence of Arabia. Richard E. Grant is in the movie. He'll be playing a character named Allegiant General Pride. He is in the First Order, so presumably he is not a good guy. There are fan theories that maybe he could possibly be General Hux's father, but he's definitely playing for the wrong team. There's also a character named Jana, played by Naomi Ackie, and she is riding an animal called an Orback. And that is about all we know about her. There's a lot of fan theories about Jana. We know Luke Skywalker will be in this movie. We're not sure what form he's going to take. He could be a Force ghost, or we may see him in a flashback. We're not sure, but we do know that he's going to be there. In the new movie, it will provide the climax to the literally millennia-long conflict between the Jedi Order on the one hand and the Sith on the other. There's still a lot that we don't know about the new movie. Starting with the meaning of the title. Who is the Skywalker that's going to rise? It could be Rey. We don't know who her parents are. She could be a Skywalker. When we meet Rey, she is waiting for her parents to come back. Then in Last Jedi, Kylo Ren says that they were just sort of trash gatherers who abandoned her and then died. But Kylo Ren is, of course, not really a reliable narrator. It's also been suggested that Skywalker is not a person, but rather a new kind of order of sort of Force-sensitive warriors who will kind of rise up and come after the Jedi. Another big question raised by the teaser is Palpatine. We hear him laugh in the trailer.
No one's ever really gone.
So we can assume that Palpatine is going to come back in some form. I guess they could flash all the way back to, springtime for Palpatine. He was young once. People in Star Wars tend to be related to each other. That is kind of a common trope. So one theory is that Jana is Lando's daughter. Lando is a charismatic guy. He has been knocking around the universe for a long time. It's entirely possible that he has a kid or two out there. Maybe Jana's one of them. Abrams mentioned while we were reporting this article that the connection between Kylo Ren and Rey runs deeper than anybody realizes. It's entirely possible that they could turn out to be brother and sister. In the new movie, we're going to resolve that. It's a good thing they didn't make out. It was touch and go for a while there.
Not gonna be really
Something I'm really curious about is whether we're going to see more Force users in this movie. At this point, we're basically down to two, Kylo Ren and Rey and Broom Boy. It seems like the kind of throwaway Rian Johnson would do, and that JJ would be like, Ryan, that is so stupid. We're not having Broom Boy in the movie. They should have Broom Boy turn out to go like super wrong and be like a major Sith. That would be a good twist. I should have suggested that to JJ. Another question that's sort of out there on the internet, will we see Snoke? We never really learned that much about Supreme Leader Snoke, and he did look very dead the last time we saw him. But there's a lot of unanswered questions around him, so who knows? He could turn up. Another dangling thread is Chewbacca. Chewbacca's best buddy, Han Solo, got killed by Kylo Ren. I think everybody is wondering if he's kind of going to get his revenge and take out Kylo Ren with a bowcaster. It would be super satisfying if Chewbacca got some kind of closure for the trauma of losing Han Solo. You have to wonder what's going to happen to the Millennium Falcon at the end of the movie. The Millennium Falcon, at this point, it's almost a character. It's got so much personality. Everybody's so fond of it. It was originally Lando's. I feel as though Chewbacca probably has some sense of ownership over it as well.
Do you know if any main characters died in the film?
The answer to that is yes. Star Wars stuff is always super locked down by Disney, but every once in a while, when you're talking to a cast member, they will let something slip out. I know a few things I shouldn't know, and that is all I'm going to say about it, because it's so much better to find these things out when you watch the movie. That is everything that we know and don't know and shouldn't know about The Rise of Skywalker. As you can see, almost everything about it is still a mystery, which is probably as it should be. And everything is going to be revealed around Christmas time this year.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
I like listening to individuals who are semi-knowledgeable, but not to the length of some of us or you, right? There's like, you have the layers. You sort of have the really super casual fans that goes to the theater just once, like Star Wars, but goes there, that was great, and then they don't go and see it again. And then you kind of begin to build on there. The individuals that are fans, and they buy the Blu-rays, and they may watch them over and over again, but then they don't spend time getting into the minutia or going on Reddit, right? And then you kind of build from there until you're like Uber status and doing 175 podcast talking to yourself for an hour, roughly an hour and a half every single week about Star Wars. This guy was kind of in the middle somewhere. You could tell he knew his stuff, but also some of his speculation was a little off base. Working in reviews in reverse and sort of picking out just the things that I want to talk about on the show, because there's a lot there. The comment about him finding out that somebody dies, I don't think it's anybody major. What I mean by that is certainly not the main protagonists. That's not to say they couldn't, but whatever got leaked to him, I seriously doubt that was a leak that Rey or Kylo dies, because that would be kept locked shut. I would think that would be more of a second or third sort of degree character. Perhaps Chewie, maybe Leia if they decide to do that, although I'm with a lot of people that are under the impression that Leia's going to make it out through this whole film. Some people have commented on Pisana, this new desert planet, and how many desert planets are we going to get in Star Wars. I tend to agree with that. I'll be curious to see if they do anything else to kind of differentiate Pisana from Geonosis or Tatooine or Jeddah or Jakku. If it serves the purpose of the story, which I would imagine they've gone to this particular planet and it couldn't be one of the other planets that we've visited before, I'm okay with that. I also know that if you want to shoot on location, you're going to be limited on planet Earth to find a space that you don't have to go and heavily CGI to make you look unique and different. And already the shot that we saw at the beginning of the trailer of Pisana, it does look a little different. There's more foliage on the ground, and the mountains look a little different. So it's not a huge deal to me. if it were me, I'd try to make it a slightly more exotic planet than what we're used to seeing. The Kamiji planet, am I saying that right? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Where'd my other lists go? That looks interesting. There's some speculation from MakingStarWars.net that planet where Zori Bliss is on is the one that is the largest set they've ever built before. But what I want to point out before we get into listener feedback, and the thing that I want to dive into, is first off, Driver confirming that the Force bond between Kylo Ren and Rey will run even deeper than previously revealed. Once again, the connection between Kylo Ren and Rey runs deeper. An actor/actress he was interviewing let it slip that somebody dies in the film, but couldn't say who. Rey and Kylo are the anima and animus of Star Wars, as was Padme and Anakin, and likely 1,000 generations of dualities before them. If you're not going to do mommy-daddy issues as the core element of your trilogy, daddy issues specifically in the original trilogy, then you're going to be doing boy-girl issues. And now that we're heading into the Rise of Skywalker, after we've passed through The Last Jedi, which was growing pains for the Star Wars mythology, but a necessary one. With what we're learning now, for me, for this fan, I'm more excited for the Rise of Skywalker than I even thought I could be. Because it really does seem to be that J.J. Abrams has picked up where Rian Johnson left off and decided, or it was planned from the beginning, which we'll also get to here in just a moment, that this is where the story was going to go. And Rian Johnson was specifically chosen for The Last Jedi to handle bringing up to the surface more so than was done in The Force Awakens, when we're looking at the arc, the relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren, so that whoever did Episode 9, and in this case, J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio, could bring it home, satisfy the 9 stories of the Star Wars saga, resolve the Jedi Sith, but also do it through these 2 core characters. And since we haven't been looking at any mommy-daddy issues, and I think that's why a lot of people go and focus sort of on Rey's lineage, of this idea that, is that where the conflict is going to be? No. Rian Johnson took care of that in The Last Jedi. She goes to the Mirror Cave. It shows that it's her. She faces the most difficult thing that she can face, and that is she has to find out for herself who she is, kind of like Ben Solo is trying to find out who he is, and that's what needs to be resolved in this final film. Okay? Pure speculation, but where my heart and my mind are, and what I am blissfully hoping we get a version of, is this red thread of fate. I was excited for this movie because of The Last Jedi, which in my opinion is more of a true sequel in terms of looking at Joseph Campbell's arc of the hero's journey. The Force Awakens doesn't really fit into that, but The Last Jedi absolutely does. And that it also appears that J.J. Abrams was inspired by Rian Johnson, right? And is going to go and emotionally close this epic out with these 2 characters. Right? I've always been a doing nothing with my fingers Reylo, but that also means many different things. Okay? The Last Jedi certainly embraced the Reylo idea, but I'm keeping as open mind as possible of what that could eventually mean at the end of this film. For me, Reylo does not necessarily have to land on the 2 of them holding hands walking off into the sunset, although if played right, I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with the finale that shows Ben Solo redeemed, heading off to Tatooine to put himself in exile, and the final shot of the movie is Rey showing up in a ship to go and join him, and then we can extrapolate that the 2 of these individuals end up together. But again, I'm not, my expectations I'm keeping in check and trusting in J.J. Abrams to do what it is that he wants to do to close out this saga. The article that I have here in front of me goes like this. Vanity Fair's website ran a number of breakout articles, and one of them contained a curious tidbit that should settle some arguments in the Star Wars fandom. Yes, it turns out that contrary to some previously discussed information that there was a plan for these episodic saga sequels from the beginning. Adam Driver confirms that Kylo's story, for one, has always had a beginning, middle, and an end. An overall arc was very, not vague, the opposite. It was very clear there was an end in sight even from the very beginning. An overall arc was very, not vague, the opposite. It was very clear there was an end in sight even from the very beginning, he told Vanity Fair. The details obviously hadn't been worked out, but he had talked about the very thing that we'd be working towards with this last one. And that's what I wonder about what Colin Trevorrow did. And if Colin Trevorrow wrote a story that wasn't staying true with the vision that they had for the three stories and where it was supposed to go. There are other things, the article goes on, to contend with other than just Kylo's fate, however. Rey's parentage is another thing that fans have debated for a while, with some assuming she is truly a nobody, as stated in The Last Jedi, while others assuming she must be a legacy character's relative. Was that decision always set in stone? We don't have a concrete answer, but Abrams praises The Last Jedi director and writer Rian Johnson for taking the story in bold new directions, which he told Vanity Fair inspired his own filmmaking choices in The Rise of Skywalker. Having seen what Rian did made me approach this from a place of instinct and gut, Abrams told the magazine. I was making choices that I knew I would not have made on 7, some story-wise, but more in terms of directing. I found myself feeling less like I'm going to try and do something that feels like it's only true to the specifics of this franchise or the story. Because the two seem to be on the same wavelength, it's possible they always were, and by design, after all, Daisy Ridley has said from the beginning that she knows who Rey's parents are. We weren't given concrete information in The Last Jedi, but it was inferred that Kylo read her mind when he called them filthy junk traders. Also remember that it was Rey herself who called them nobodies. We love knowing these films will be cohesive in some way, and we can't wait to see how Kylo's story wraps up in The Rise of Skywalker when it hits theaters on December 20th. I find it really fascinating. At the end of the article, we said we can't wait to see how Kylo's story wraps up when The Rise of Skywalker hits theaters. This is as much Ben Solo's story as it is Rey's. I think it was wise to put Rey in the forefront, to have her be the lead doing that thing with my fingers. But clearly, we have been getting just as much of both of these characters in these two films, and certainly heading into The Rise of Skywalker. And this goes back to yet another reason why I adore The Last Jedi the way that I do. And again, if you don't, that's cool. To each their own. But I love this film because it was a really difficult film to have to tackle. There's a number of different ways that you obviously could go in propelling these characters and giving them more depth and putting them through challenges than to pick up right where The Force Awakens left off. But in that, it really does end up becoming a better true extension, more realistic than if they had jumped ahead with this huge gap. You could do that. This is fantasy happening in a galaxy far, far away. But I really do love the fact that through the course of days, these two characters come together in Ben Solo and Rey. Ben gets into her mind. I mean, talk about being intimate with somebody, getting into their mind and their thoughts. He knows most likely what her instinctive reaction is to seeing him now taking off the helmet. It's probably shrouded because of her frustration and fear of being mind probed by this dude, but she's able to push back. She's able to go and challenge him. We get to the end of The Force Awakens and we get this fantastic lightsaber battle between these two individuals, but Kylo Ren is pulling his punches. You need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the Force. Yeah, come with me. He was trying to get her from the get-go. So to me, it makes the most sense and makes for a better story to tell than jumping ahead in what Rian Johnson did by starting this movie over. And I know that starting this movie where The Force Awakens left off, and I know that Ryan's argument was, well, we all wanted to see what happened next between Luke and Rey, and while that's important, I like the fact that we're beginning to see this continuation of the intrigue between these two characters and that arc that ends up taking place over the course of a few days within The Last Jedi, when they haven't really known each other all that well, but they clearly have a connection, and they both end up seeing it and feeling it through these Force bonds to the point where they both realize that they are kind of alone and they only have each other, which leads to that epic finger-touching loving scene in The Last Jedi. And of course, we end up with the division and the conflict at the end of this film. I love the way that Rian Johnson was able to take these characters and bring, even in a short period of time, bring their relationship to a completely other level. And now we'll jump ahead, and they confirmed a year later into The Rise of Skywalker, and we've already established that these two are connected in some way, shape, or form, and clearly that connection is going to get even deeper in this final film and most likely be the catalyst of resolve that brings an end, a definitive end to the Skywalker story and this saga. And I'm just giddy over the fact that Reylo is going to be a part of that. I know that people won't be. This fan absolutely is. I'm a hopeless romantic at heart. And I really do love this idea of this red thread of fate, that these two individuals, this was supposed to happen. It's happening for a reason. And regardless of how they're twisted and pulled and stretched and the conflicts that they go through, in the end, they are going to be pulled together. And only through that can we bring resolve in this whole conflict to an epic conclusion. That was just the biggest takeaway for me. And I love the fact that J.J. Abrams was upfront about how he was inspired by what Rian Johnson did with his story to take a different approach and not play it as safe. Because we know that going into The Force Awakens, part of J.J. Abrams' job was to attempt to bring back the nostalgia and love for the Star Wars franchise that so many people felt like they had lost because of what had happened in the prequels. And so he was a bit stuck. He needed to put this story in there of these two characters and bringing them together, but he had to do it around this framework that was able to bring back all of those feelings of the fans. So let's get into a little bit more of this when it comes to this connection. I know many people have commented on the on listener feedback this week along these lines, and so we can take that opportunity to discuss it even further. Again, I want to remind you to go to mynerdworld.net. That's where you can find everything about this podcast, artwork for the covers for my science fiction series. You can also purchase the book there as well at mynerdworld.net.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
As always, you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube, which many of you do, and I'm very thankful for that. First, couple of comments here come from FN1189. Says, hey there, John. Your podcast, along with Girls with Sabers, are the raddest in this great Star Wars community. Yes, they are rad. Girls with Sabers are rad. They're totally rad. What do you think of the notion that the production of the sequel trilogy was rushed? Some fans believe that there was never a concrete plan in place as far as how the sequel trilogy story was supposed to play out. This happens to be a Disney Star Wars criticism I hear a lot, and I just want to know your thoughts. Thanks. No, I don't think it was rushed. It was rushed at all. And like I mentioned in the article that was presented after the Vanity Fair information came out, they clearly had a pathway from the start. I do think there is something to putting some distance between the films and developing that mythology and giving the fandom some time to breathe. I don't necessarily need it. I would love a movie a year to be able to speculate on what's coming up next. I liked the way that they were laying things out, although they did have a year gap in between the the saga films. But be that as it may, I think it's a good idea of what they're doing to give the fandom some time to breathe, because this next set of films is going to be the biggest challenge that Disney and Lucasfilm will have ever needed to face since George Lucas sold the company, and that is creating not just a batch of new characters, but a brand new storyline not attached to the Skywalker saga and the original 9 films. Now, granted, I would still like them to continue moving forward and going with 10, even if it's with new characters and we're no longer talking about the Skywalker saga. I think that would be fantastic. I'd love to go forward in the timeline. They still could do that, but obviously the speculation is they're going to go back. I think that maybe Rian Johnson's trilogy will be the one that will take place further along in the timeline. But I understand what they're doing, and I think it's a smart move. And as I laid it out last week on the show, when you look at the calendar of speculation and the things we have to talk about, again, you'll get the Rise of Skywalker at the end of this year, and then we'll have the gap between the Rise of Skywalker and the Blu-ray release in 2020, and then we got the Mandalorian second season and the Cassian Andor series, and then by the time we get in, and then we have Celebration taking place next August, most likely, so that's in 2020, and then by the time we get into 2021 is when we'll begin to get our first bits and pieces of information on the 2022 film, if they don't decide to go and add another film in there, which I think is still a big, big possibility. So by the time you get to the end of 2021, we'll have a pretty good idea of what that Benioff and Weiss movie is going to be about in 2022, and the speculation will go and start all over again. I hope that Disney feeds the fandom something that we can chew on way earlier than that and starts laying the groundwork of whatever new mythology we're going to be following for this next group of films for the hardcore fans. To me, that's the lifeblood of Star Wars, is the mythology. It's why I come here to talk about Star Wars every single week. I love all aspects of Star Wars and everything that the content creators make across the board in all of its different iterations, but at my Star Wars center and core is the saga story, and right now it's Ben Solo and Rey Nobody. I can't wait to see that story resolved and those two characters come together once again in this film. And as I keep saying, it's one of the reasons why I love The Last Jedi so much, because I'm a hopeless romantic at heart, man, and I just love what Rian Johnson did with those characters. All right, Norwal Music, short and sweet. A lot of great stuff on your channel. Excellent job. Thank you, Norwal. I appreciate that. J.O.B. says, one of the best scenes in all of Star Wars was when Qui-Gon used his lightsaber to melt the door on the Neimoidian's ship. I hear a lot of people mention that, actually. A lot of people go and comment on that particular moment. And it was cool. I always thought that Qui-Gon's hands got a little bit too close to the melting metal, like it would have burned him. But it doesn't take me out of the film by any stretch. All right, a friend of the show, Misconduct One, wants to respond to my comment about Game of Thrones and Benioff and Weiss. I'm sorry, John, but it was really terrible writing the last 2 episodes of Game of Thrones. I respectfully disagree that I shouldn't be worried about these 2 people writing the Star Wars trilogy. I don't think, just for the sake of clarity, I don't think that, if I said you shouldn't be worried, let me rephrase that. I'm not worried. You can be whatever you want to be. I'm not going to tell people how to feel. So if I said that in the last episode, I apologize. It's probably a byproduct of the way that I conduct this show and how I don't do any editing. As you can tell with that stumble, I don't do any editing of the show because I treat it the same way that I do my regular Monday through Friday radio show. So you can feel however you want to feel. I've defended them for many years, but that stuff last week and the week before was horrible, and the character disconnect was really obvious. The 2 men have even contradicted themselves now in their own snide the episode interviews. I'm no expert, but I'm not an idiot. Those who think I'm just ranting, please don't assume that I'm too stupid to know the difference between good storytelling and bad storytelling. That I'm such an idiot, I've forgotten who the characters were for the last 10 years of the show. And again, I know you're not pointing that at me, Misconduct, but I certainly don't think that. And how you are, I would never think that. This really was bad, and the writers think their audience is stupid enough to believe this turn of events literally in what felt like 2.2 seconds. There was no character development to make me believe that this turn of events was possible. I love you, John, and it's okay if you think it was great, but I hope you understand that I have legitimately good reasons why it was horrible, and I'm very apprehensive of these two people writing Star Wars stories in the future, especially after the way I just saw them totally tear down arguably one of the greatest female characters of all time. I'd be okay with the character's turn if it had been developed more, but it wasn't. Anyway, I'm sorry. I hope you don't hate me or think that I'm a negative fan, but it was heartbreaking and not in a good way. It was character assassination. No, Misconduct One, you are entitled to your opinion. I disagree. I liked what they did on Game of Thrones. I personally think that part of the issue, not necessarily in your case, but I think part of the issue that Game of Thrones had a hard time with is, one, it's difficult to go up and wrap up any sort of franchise definitively that is that popular. I mean, it's the same thing that J.J. Abrams is faced with Episode 9. But also, the gap of time between the last two seasons I don't think helped. I think that gap in closing out this final season did a disservice to Game of Thrones because it built up. And again, I'm not talking necessarily about Misconduct 1 here. If this isn't you, then I'm not referring to you. But I think for a lot of people, their headcanon got in the way of their view of the film, of the series. I loved it. I loved Danny's turn. Totally bought it. Thought it was fantastic and heartbreaking at the end, but art is subjective. All right. Salvador Mendez writes this. I agree with you. The majority love Star Wars. Thank you, Salvador. Let's see. We got an email here to talkshownerd@gmail.com, and it comes from Jared, and he writes this. Listen to your podcast for a few months now, and this is my first email to give you fan feedback. I absolutely love your Star Wars podcast and everything you talk about and speculate over. Thank you very much, Jared. I believe I found you through Girls with Sabers, who always put who put out a good word for you. That's because they're rad. I put out a good word for Girls with Sabers because they're awesome. Since I started listening, I have thoroughly enjoyed each podcast. I love how you spread out each of your topics with trailer clips between the segments. Let's see here. Thank you so much for all the kind words. I am also a devout Reylo, and your commentary on everything Rey and Ben Solo has stoked my love for the shipping community even further. I cannot wait for 9, and I'm taking your advice to enjoy these next 8 months by watching and reading all things Star Wars that I love. I love and share your optimism towards Bendemption and Reylo and how it will play out in 9. As Hello Greedo has said in the past, in JJ We Trust, I'm holding out hope that there was a fully complete story arc for the sequel trilogy and that J.J. Abrams and Johnson's visions truly did mesh well with the overall story of the trilogy and the saga. I agree with you that since J.J. Abrams was the executive producer of The Last Jedi and has said he wanted to direct the film, there is a plan for the trilogy that was set in place. Yep, I agree too. I love how you relate this to your science fiction book starting with Embark. I cannot wait to purchase it, by the way. Go do it today, Jared. Amazon.com, Jon Justice. Go purchase a copy of Embark. Or you can go to mynerdworld.net. I love your shameless plugs for the book as it's good for publicity for you anyways. Even though I've been busy, I will purchase it soon and I will definitely be a part of my summer reading this year. I think I've covered everything I wanted to right now. Thank you so much for everything you do. You have an amazing and incredibly fun podcast. Cordially, Jared. Thank you very much, Jared. I greatly do appreciate that. I hope you go and pick up a copy of the book. And thank you, by the way, for listening, and for those that have been here a long time, and especially for those of you that have already gone and purchased the book, I've struggled with doing a Patreon. I do this because of my love of Star Wars. I don't necessarily need money from it. It would be great, and it is great when I get advertisers that run on the show, which does happen on occasion. But selling books is not easy, and this is a fantastic way for me to get the word about the book, especially being a Star Wars fan and having written my science fiction space opera Embark because of my love of Star Wars. So I'll say again, and I'll say it at the end of the show, if you want to support this podcast, please take a moment right now, pause it, or as soon as you're done, go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, Embark, Jon Justice, and pick up a copy of the book. I'm in the middle of the editing process in the second one. Can't wait to get it out there. The beta readers gave me some fantastic feedback, and they all really seem to enjoy it. And the response I've gotten off the first book has been great. It's my first novel, so it's not perfect by any stretch. But the the reviews that I've received so far have been really, really good, and people really have enjoyed it. And the majority of those individuals are Star Wars fans. So I hope you'll go in to pick it up. And again, I'll make a few more comments before the end of the show. Kyle Bookout writes this: great episode, John. Interesting article, and I agree. Twitter and all of social media is not representative of the fandom or the population as a whole in regards to anything. Extreme opinions, either for or against, get all the attention. I'm tired of everything being politicized. Yes, amen, Kyle. And I share my middle name with your first name. Have I mentioned that before? It's John Kyle? I don't know. It's also my son's name. Let's see. There are movies, 4 quadrant movies made for everyone. The fandom menace, and I know they're giving them... let me skip to the end here. So many people are excited for Episode 9. No boycott is going to make a difference. I, for one, cannot wait. Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that. Hey, by the way, that's a really cool picture. You look very happy. Baffled and Deranged writes this: hello, John. I always look forward to your new podcast, and hopefully you're doing well. I just wanted to say that if it weren't for The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Solo, I might not have gone back to revisit the previous 6 Star Wars movies with renewed interest. Rewatching them has helped refresh my memory of past events, several viewings, which also enhance my viewing pleasure of all the Star Wars movies. They are more than enough to keep me entertained. Thank you for your wonderful podcast. Thank you, Baffled. Always appreciate it. Severin writes this, the headline to talkshownerd@gmail.com. Vanity Fair dropped! ! Using many exclamation points is rad. What have I done? I don't think I've shrieked with excitement louder than I just did now when I saw the first images from Annie Leibovitz's Star Wars shoot had dropped, except for the Rise of Skywalker teaser. That was ear-splitting. After watching on YouTube what Lev Grossman had to say about the piece he wrote in Vanity Fair, all I could think of was, I can't wait to hear what Jon has to say about this. What did you think of it all? I've definitely taken to heart all you have to say about soaking in this amazing experience, enjoying it for all that it is worth, and diving into anything and everything you can get your hands on before Episode 9. Thanks for keeping us helping us on this amazing once-in-a-lifetime journey. I've even started to get my husband's interested in your podcast, which is way cool. Kudos to you. Permission to use my name if this is applicable. Of course. Thank you, Severin. I really do appreciate it. And again, I won't repeat everything I said over the Vanity Fair release, but I was just thrilled to see so much focus on Ben and Rey. And I guess it's obvious to say that's the way it was going to go and the way it was going to be as we head into this final film. But it's tough because of the negativity towards The Last Jedi. I don't know. Again, getting The Last Jedi comic book adaptation and then grabbing the film to watch it again here soon, may do it on this long weekend. I just, that my love for that film grows and grows. And it's because of that dynamic between Rey and Ben, and so much of that Vanity Fair piece was focused on those individuals that it just continued to stoke my fandom and my flame for seeing how this whole thing is going to shake out. And again, I'm a hopeless romantic. This trilogy has the potential to be my favorite of all 9 films, of all 3 trilogies, this one that we're currently in the middle of. And I was excited for The Rise of Skywalker, but man, I am over the moon for this film. Because it really does feel like a genuine extension from what Rian Johnson did, and that has me excited, because I love that film so much. All right, let's go to Anthea Gaia. Had to laugh when you played that clip from the opening of The Phantom Menace when the reporter mentioned that a small portion of people they interviewed after the movie said they were done with Star Wars. It appears we are reliving that today. Yup. It's just all the more apparent now due to social media. Yup. You make excellent points about Twitter not being the source for what the majority of the fandom feels. I think that is something that is so important for people to realize. I know very few of my friends and family are on Twitter, and many of them are Star Wars fans. What I feel many podcasts say about the majority of fans hating The Last Jedi is just so inaccurate, and I'm so glad you brought this topic up this week. Thank you for that. And thank you, as always, for the comment there, Amy. I appreciate it. Taylor writes this: I think, actually, JJ was the one who set up Reylo. Yep. Before seeing anyone else's opinions, I saw Reylo immediately in the TFA. They go on to say, and way back before TFA, JJ had said that romance was going to be at the center of the story, and I believe this is Ben's story, but they hid it as Rey's story because it would not spoil Ben's redemption. So it's worded a little wonky there, but yeah, and I agree, and I was kind of alluding to this early on that yeah, they put Rey front and center as sort of the hero of this and sort of cast. And let me back up here. Let me boop 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 back the truck up for just a second because there's a couple of great comments here at the end that I want to get into, including this lengthy one that we'll wrap up on from Black Eyed Lily. But going back to The Force Awakens when they first presented Kylo Ren, knowing it was going to be played by Adam Driver, we all looked at him as a Vader wannabe, like an emo Vader. This is what he wanted to be. But at least in my mind, I won't speak for you. I'll speak for me. For me, okay, this is sort of the Darth Vader equivalent of what we saw in the original trilogy and what they're going for here, and the mask was supposed to evoke that, but be different and new and fresh. Okay. The truth of the matter was, it was way more complicated than that, and that's what we're starting to see. Those of you who picked up on those Reylo themes from The Force Awakens, hat tip to you, I was late to the party on that one. I didn't really think about it before The Last Jedi rolled around. That's why The Last Jedi was such an emotional gut punch to the feels in the best possible way. Because much of what I've been reading and the speculation leading into The Last Jedi and what many of you had pulled out of The Force Awakens and that connection between these two characters, it was very clear that from the beginning, and certainly, as Taylor said, based off of J.J. Abrams' own statements, this was planned from the get-go, and this was not designed to be like the original trilogy. The look and feel and the nostalgia part of it was, but no, this was something bookending these three trilogies together with the prequels and the sequels, with the original trilogy in the middle. This was something that was going to be a lot more aligned with the prequel trilogy and Anakin and Padme than it was going to be with the original trilogy and the parental issues. And people are correct to go back to The Force Awakens, what JJ said, and going back to what I mentioned earlier in the show, how this was all planned from the beginning. Right? And the difference is, and I don't want to wipe out too hard on this, but the difference is that without the fandom's ability now to share their opinion at the drop of a hat on YouTube and Twitter, and how difficult it is to avoid that. I made a comment like this on the show. Let me wedge this in this rant. But I made a comment on the show that, thank the good Lord Almighty that we can't read each other's minds. And if you ever wanted an example of why we should never be able to read each other's minds, just go to Twitter. Because that's the closest you're going to get to reading individuals' minds are those comments that they end up making on Twitter. Especially the individuals who are anonymous, who are more than willing to go out there and put every single thought that pops into their head out on Twitter for everybody to see. So the fandom in discussing the sequel trilogy were in completely uncharted territory, where when the prequel trilogy came out, we didn't have the ability to share all our thoughts and feelings. And so normally when you put out a saga like this in a trilogy, we just let it unfold on the screen, let the stories play out, and the conversations that we have and the speculation that we have takes place among our friends. Our closest friends. That's the way it was during the original trilogy, and that's the way it was during the prequel trilogy. If you wanted to go and find information out about a film, you had to go and seek it and seek articles to go and find out. Now it's not like it anymore. You can't open YouTube without seeing somebody, one thing that could have fixed The Last Jedi, everything wrong with this kind of stuff, right? Or Twitter, if you're looking at any of the right hashtags as they relate to Star Wars. But if you strip all that away and you just go to watch these films without all that commentary seeping into your mind, potentially, giving you a difference of opinions that you may not have landed on, for me, I kind of missed in The Force Awakens the fact that this story was going to be about Reylo from the beginning. That's the point I was trying to make. I hope that made sense. I know. I get ranty. I can't help it. All right. Petra R writes this before we get back into and wrap things up with Black Eyed Lily. This is really cool, by the way. Hey, John. Just wanted to let you know I got to visit Galaxy's Edge thanks to my best friend's Disneyland cast member preview. That's awesome, and I'm jealous. It was fantastic. Smuggler's Run is an incredible ride, and I really did get emotional entering the familiar surroundings of the Millennium Falcon, including sitting at the Dejarik table and inside of the cockpit. The entire planet of Batuu was a sight to behold. I hope if you're out in Southern California for Celebration next year, you and your family, that's the plan, will be able to visit Galaxy's Edge as an experience the Star Wars fans will find truly special. Thank you, Petra, for sharing that. And I'm jealous. I miss Southern California dearly. That's where I was born and raised, and I love it here in Minnesota, don't misunderstand. But, man, I loved Southern California. All right, so Black-Eyed Lily wrote this fantastic My Nerd World Mother's Day edition email to me. And I'm going to kind of, it's pretty lengthy, but there's a lot of great information in here. They talk about how took an extra time to get around to listening to the Mother's Day show, wanted to respond to some of the things that were brought up in that episode, especially about the Reylo Force Bond. I think it's very interesting that many individuals from the Reylo community came up with the idea of a Force Bond after seeing The Force Awakens. This was for a few reasons. Some people were already familiar with the concept from the Knights of the Old Republic, and Bastila and Revan, and the fact that Rey and Kylo resembled these characters in their design was not lost on people. Then there were the books that gave additional clues to the fact that there might be an even older, deeper connection between the two of them. In the Force Awakens novelization, Rey recognized Kylo when she first caught sight of him on Takodana, from a daydream, from a nightmare. And I got the impression that she wasn't referring to the Force vision she had just experienced in Maz's castle, which also featured Kylo. Then you have Kylo's strong reaction of what girl and the girl I've heard so much about. These things left people considering the idea that Kylo and Rey may have had visions or dreams about each other for some time already, but of course there was no firm evidence of this. Next, you had the fact that Rey acquired some of Kylo's Force abilities after finding herself inside his mind in the interrogation scene. A common complaint of The Force Awakens is that Rey shouldn't have been able to mind trick a stormtrooper guarding her or fight Kylo so effectively with a lightsaber. But others felt that these skills could have been acquired when she was in his mind. And the last Jedi novelization confirmed that Rey had indeed gained much of her Force knowledge this way. For all of the above reasons, a number of people thought the two of them might already share a Force bond before The Last Jedi was released, which leads me to believe that Snoke was not the cause of their Force connection. Although, I could believe that he opened up the ability to actually see each other through the Force. But for me, the most important piece of evidence about their connection came from an episode of the Star Wars show called The Last Jedi Secrets Explained. And I love this, by the way, and thank you so much for writing this email, Black-Eyed Lily, because I love when people go and look into this stuff and the little subtle things that are said, right? I just dig that. And I'll use this as a slight example and then get back into this email. But working in talk radio as a talk show host, I worked for a company, the last company I worked for before iHeart. They owned a TV network, local TV network. And so they were attached, okay? And we did a lot of stuff, and I knew the individuals, the anchors and the reporters really, really well, and got to know them really, really well. And one of the things that I always thought was fascinating, especially when we talk about bias and things like fake news and all this nonsense, is how it's really, really difficult for individuals to keep their own beliefs and feelings from getting out in reporting, right? A lot of the journalists are supposed to be, neutral, but it's almost impossible, just as humans, for us not to let certain things slip out. And so if you're keen to pick up on these sort of lines of questioning and little tiny things, you can pick up these nuggets that you don't normally find with these comments that are made from individuals who know the truth about the content that you're interested in, and their subconscious is kind of playing with them because they really want to get it out there, but they don't want to let everything spill. And if you really pay close attention, you can find some really good nuggets. Which brings us to this episode of The Last Jedi Secrets Explained from the Star Wars show. The episode featured the Lucasfilm Story Group. The group discussed a number of aspects about the movie, and they got around to talking about the Force Bond scenes with Rey and Kylo, at which time Rain Roberts said that what I think is the most definitive explanation of the Force Bond. She said, well, It kind of goes back to something Larry Kasdan used to talk about when we were doing The Force Awakens. It's not in the script, but when he peers into her mind, there is something profound that happens between them. And the way that Larry used to describe it was, there was this energy between them. And it kind of almost, I don't really want to say it, but something a little more than what you would expect. I think it is fun to see it play out. Pablo Hidalgo of the story group follows that up with, I feel like there is definitely a door that opens between them in The Force Awakens, where they pull from each other in terms of skill and memories. I tried to get these quotes word for word through several listenings, but I might be off by a word or two. So with that interview with the story group, I think it is a strong bet to say that the Force bond was created in the interrogation scene. Now that we have a quote from the Rise of Skywalker in the Vanity Fair article that their Force connection will turn out to run even deeper than we thought, it brings me back to the idea that there was some sort of cosmic connection even before they met. And no, I don't think that is because they are siblings or cousins. I'm going to send this off because it's already getting rather long, but I'm going to follow up with another email about the hero's journey, as this is something else you were discussing in this episode. And I have some interesting information that I came across recently in relation to this application in the sequel trilogy. I realize this email is far too long to read. Little did you know. But feel free to share any part of it you want, especially if you want to refer people to that episode of the Star Wars show, which I think is a great hint as to what is going on with the Force bond. And look, the reality is that deeper meaning may not have been revealed to us yet. As a matter of fact, it probably hasn't been revealed to us yet. I think that heading into the Rise of Skywalker, this return of Palpatine, evil still there, he never went away in some way, shape, or form. Rey and Kylo were drawn out by the Force to go encounter this. I also love this idea that I've heard people playing with, and I haven't really found a good fleshed out version of this yet, but I find it compelling, this thought that Kylo Ren has been in on it from the start. Like, he knew that this evil was going to rise, and even though he was influenced by Snoke, and he felt betrayed by Luke, he had another goal in mind all along and has been playing this part. And this finish what Vader started was actually more pointing towards ending evil once and for all. Now, again, I haven't seen that fleshed out, and there are certainly a lot of holes in what I just laid out, but I find that little tidbit interesting, that he intentionally went to the dark side in order to try to end this bigger baddie that's still out there. Which spins back into The Last Jedi, we need to let it all die. The Sith, the Jedi, let it all die, join me. Like, he knows something. Like, I feel like Kylo Ren knows something about Rey, but just isn't in a position yet where he can completely divulge it about her importance to him and to ending this conflict once and for all. I really look forward to what Black-Eyed Lily has to say further about this particular issue, and especially what she says here about the hero's journey. So, all right. So, went way longer than I expected to this episode. Get the copy of the graphic novelization of The Last Jedi. And if you can find that other one from IDW, man, check it out. It's really, really cool. It's a lot smaller, but the artwork is really, really neat. I may have to get it as I increase my fandom of The Last Jedi, but just this comic book adaptation that's in my hand right now is really, really just incredible. Love that movie so much. Support the show by liking it on YouTube. I never ask people to go and do that, but please do. Subscribe to the channel, to the YouTube channel. Like the video, please, on every place that you can find it, whether it's Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, iHeartRadio, or YouTube. Those are all the locations where you can get the podcast. Share it with friends. And as I mentioned before, if you want to support this podcast, if you like what I do every single week, and you have not gone to purchase either the ebook, the paperback, or the audiobook narrated and produced by me of my science fiction epic Embark, it is the first story of a trilogy where our main hero protagonist fights to protect the girl that he loves dearly, as the planet Earth is facing an industrial apocalypse and a corporate madman works hard to go and exploit the disaster with a secret leak and a covertly created military. It is, again, it's a labor of love. I'm trying to make some money too, but I really had a fantastic time writing that book. I wanted to challenge myself to do something I never thought I could do, and this is turning into something that I plan to keep doing with the second book, Embark, Treasure in Darkness, to be released here in the next couple of months. But go to Amazon.com, search Jon, Jon Justice, and it would mean everything to me if you would go and pick up a copy for you or a friend. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, mark it to read and give me some page reads on Kindle Unlimited. And as always, leave a review if you haven't done so already. Again, I hope you had a fantastic Memorial Day weekend. For those that have served our country, for those that are related to those that have served our country, for the brave men and women that fight for our freedom, I just want to take a moment and say thank you so much for your service as we work through this incredibly important Memorial Day holiday weekend. And as always, thank you so much for checking the show out. We'll be back again next week, and I look forward to your feedback between now and then. talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can also drop a comment on YouTube. Have yourself a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.